So I invite you all to this online Bible course and the class on the Introduction to Old Testament again. And I welcome our Secretary of the Sinai Covenant Bible, Father John Baptist, and also today's professor is our Stanley Kumar. He is teaching. He is a professor in St. Peter's Pontifical Institute and also seminary, and he is a well-known Bible scholar in our region and also in India, one of the very active man, Bible man. So I welcome him also. And yes, I welcome every one of you who are now present here. It is very nicely told in by the title, Friends of the Bible. Anyway, I told, I spoke with Father Baptist, okay, Friends of the Bible now, today. But later, by next month, you all become participants of the Bible course. It is not only just well-wishers, friends, but I urge you very, very earnestly to be very, very active participant of the Bible course. Because it is not a course which we can take it now and then, or as and we like, or as and when we are able. These are all different things. See, in our Catholic circle, you can attend mass in your parish anytime, any mass, and so it is not fixed. But now in this type of courses, it is fixed. So it is okay. Today you attend and you find out how there are so many are attending the course like you. So I first of all urge you to register your names, then you become really part of our program. So I hope you follow my idea. Can I hear anything from the participants?
Yeah, they are
Okay, that's the thing. And so I urge you like that. And Bible is not so, it is simple for simple readers. It might look like a story sometimes. It might look like a expectation. It might look like a prayer. It might look like a Bible, like letters, like St. Paul. So these are all true in one way. But Bible is the Word of God. It's a one unique plan of God, salvation for man, for the world, not only for man, not only for women and men, and so for the human beings, but for the whole world. And it is a unique and one. It is not split. Old Testament and New Testament, even though we got it different stages, the books, but then there are one book. And from Old Testament to New Testament, one message. Message is the salvation of the world given by God through Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is not seen only in the New Testament, but seen in the beginning of the creation itself, as in John, it's the first chapter of the Gospel, he says. So anyway, I don't need to take the time of Father Stanley. Let him deal with it. I urge every one of you again and again. I hope you here to register the names with the secretary, our office and the CPA commission to Bangalore. And next time I will be giving the course on Yeah. So I wish to see you all for the next course also.
Recording.
With this, I conclude my invitation to everyone, and I appreciate you all again for taking effort to attend this course, to this program. I wish every one of you God's blessing. Thank you very much.
Now, Bishop has already introduced the chairperson or the speaker of the day. So now Stanley Kumar will speak to us some introductory notes on the Old Testament. Kindly don't touch the present now. Don't present anything in the screen. We are touching that. Only hear and see. Thank you. Father, you may go.
Good morning, everybody. I sincerely thank Bishop Peter Abir, the chairman of the Bible Commission, and Father John Baptist, the secretary, for this opportunity to dialogue with you, introducing the Old Testament. Bible is the love letter of God to the human community, says St. Augustine. Yes, the biggest ever written love letter of God is Bible. Through Bible, we know how much immensely God loves the human persons. St. Jerome says, he who does not know Scripture does not know Christ. Yes, if we don't know Bible, we don't know Christ. St. Teresa of Child Jesus says, how much more I would have loved the Lord if only I had opportunity to study Hebrew and Greek. At time, she was not given opportunity to study Hebrew and Greek. How much more I would have loved the Lord. That was her anguish. Today, God has given us opportunity to know Bible, to study the Word of God in its original meaning, and to understand it. So it's a privilege. We need to be grateful to the Lord. May this class bring you some knowledge about the Old Testament, whereby you understand the Bible in a better way. For Jews and the Christians, for both, the Bible is the holy book. It contains the history of the people of Israel. Otherwise, the people of Israel have no other history. It is a faith manual of the people of Israel. The Old Testament is called Vetus Testamentum in Latin, and also it's said as the first covenant, referring to the second covenant, the New Testament. The Old Testament itself is divided into 3 parts: Torah, prophets, and wisdom. I will explain the demands of it in the later part of the class. Now we move on to the understanding the Bible. Professor R. Anthony Sarasco, one of the greatest Old Testament scholar, says when we read the Bible, we need to have 2 understanding, 2 presuppositions. The first one is hermeneutical privilege of the poor. The Bible is written for the poor people, on behalf of the poor people. So when we read the Bible, we need to understand the Bible from the perspective of the poor. There, the Anami of Yahweh, the poor of God, will have a better understanding and better application for their life from the Bible. The second category that he says, hermeneutics of suspicion. When we read the Bible, we need to equally ask why it is so, why it is not like that, why is this way, why is not that way. Such a suspicious questions with regard to the biblical verses and the narratives will enable us to know more about Bible and to come for the correct understanding. The Bible is also, the Old Testament is also both charismatic and didactic. 2 technical terms are used. I'll explain the 2 terms. Charismatics. It comes from the word kerygma, which means proclamation. The Old Testament is basically the faith proclamation of the Israel people, how they encountered the Lord, how they became the people of the Lord, and how the covenant made them the people of God, and how they lived in the land of God, keeping up the promises of God. The second way, it is the faith confessions. They proclaim about God, who God is for them, and what way they should behave. It's also didactic history. Didactic history means it gives a normative history, how the people should live and how should people behave. If you are people of God, what are the ways in which you have to live? What is the manner that you have to observe the covenant of God, the laws of God? So, the Old Testament itself basically charismatic history, and also didactic history. And basically, take for example, book of Exodus, 15th chapter, 1 to 18, we have the Song of Moses. Basically, because there God is the warrior fighting for people of Israel at the Red Sea. They proclaim God as a warrior who fought for them. That is their understanding, faith confessions. And all the more, when we read the Old Testament, you have to understand the history told in the Old Testament is not a secular history or a pure history, but rather it is a salvation history. It's a salvation history of the people of God. Deuteronomy 6th chapter, 20th verse, and 26th chapter, 5th verse to 5 to 10 verses talks about the faith confessions of the people of Israel. The first experience of the people of Israel with their God is God as a redeemer. The Exodus event becomes the primordial experience for them to understand God as a redeemer. Later on, they understood this redeemer God, the liberator God, the liberative God, also the creator of the universe. That's how their understanding enveloped. Now, we just move on to the second part, history of the Old Testament we talk about. In this section, starting from the patriarchal period right up to Maccabean period, I make a small survey of the history of Israel. The first one, the patriarchal period. Patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and the history continues. Abraham was born in southern Mesopotamia. Then he migrated to Canaan. His first step at Shechem, famine struck the Palestine. Therefore, Jacob and his family moved to Egypt till the time of the Joseph. They lived there. Then once the favors of Pharaoh is withdrawn from the people of Israel, they became the slaves of the Egyptians. Till then, we have the story of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, the Pentateuch story. The Pentateuch story is the place called Nahor, Haran. In Genesis 10th chapter and 12th chapter we encounter. These names are also found in the secular history. Archaeological findings are talking about these archaeological sites are talking about Nahor, Ur, Nippur and all. That's how we have the historical story we have. And secondly, in the book in the patriarchal period, equally important are the matriarchal mothers. If the fathers of the family were called the patriarchs, the mothers of the family of the book of Genesis called matriarchs. They are also equally important. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, they too played a vital role along with their husbands in the history of Israel. They understood the plan of God, they cooperated, they executed the plan of God in their life, that they made the salvation history to go further. From patriarchal period, we move on to the book of Exodus, the period of Moses and Exodus. Moses, the hero of the Pentateuch, the author of the book of Deuteronomy writes, since then, no prophet has arisen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Book of Deuteronomy, 34th chapter, 10th verse. Just like a friend, just like exactly like Abraham, Moses was able to talk to God face to face. He stood before the Lord on behalf of the people. He stood before Pharaoh talking about the words of God and asking the liberation for the people of Israel. Miraculously, he led the people of Israel from bondage to liberation, from house of slavery to land of freedom. That's how Moses, the hero of the book of Exodus and the Pentateuch. Moses, after liberating the people of Israel, passing to the Red Sea, he brought the people to Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, they had the covenant of God with them. The Sinai Covenant is a very important element in the Old Testament that becomes the basis and mother of all covenants to be seen in the Old Testament. And later on, in the Sinai Covenant, God gives them Decalogue, 10 commandments, through which the people are given the normative laws whereby they have to behave according to the plan of God, the laws of God. In the Mount Sinai, God made the people as his own, and God became the God of the people of Israel. The national covenant of Sinai is very, very important. From there, we move on to the settlement period. When we come to the book of Joshua and Judges, we have a two history. The history is told in two ways. We have to understand very correctly. When we read the book of Joshua, we see a warrior God fighting for the people to acquire the land of promise, the land of Canaan. That's what we see in the book of Joshua, first 10 chapters. They conquer Jericho, they conquer Ai, and they go forth to conquer the Ammonites and the Moabites and Jebusites and Perizzites. The God goes before them and they could able to conquer all the people. This is the story in the book of Joshua, the conquest of the land. They say it's a conquest model. At the same time, when we come to the book of Judges, we see the people of Israel are still struggling with the Philistines, Ammonites, and Moabites for their survival and existence. Basically, because the foreign nations were continued to be the threat for the people. There, the biblical scholars they say, though the book of Joshua says the people conquered the land and occupied the promised land with the power of God, the book of Judges presents a history whereby the people of Israel in settlement in Canaan is a slow process, infiltration. Slowly they are infiltrating into the land and occupying the land and growing, increasing and multiplying. That's what we see in the book of Judges. Battlefronts, they were carrying the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, basically three important things are there. The staff of Moses or Aaron is kept in the Ark of the Covenant. That stands for the power of God. And we have the manna, that stands for the providence of God. Then we have the stone tablets, that stands for the identity of God. That's how the might of God, the providence of God, the identity of God is being carried by the people wherever they went. Later on, it was brought to the Jerusalem temple, and the temple becomes a royal place, the place of royal liturgy. I'll take up the point a little later. Now we move on to from the period of Judges and Joshua to rise of monarchy. Why did the people opt for monarchical kingdoms, the kings to rule them? Mainly because the judges, minors, military leaders, hard work leaders were not able to lead them in the war against the Philistines. Philistines are the sea people, they call, very ferocious warmongers. And they have a huge army, sea army, they invaded the places. They take, for example, 5 cities like Gaza, Ascalon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. These are the coastal cities of the Philistines. They storm into the land and occupy the people and loot them. So automatically, the people of Israel were not able to withstand them. So they thought, like any other nations, they need a king to guide them in the war, to fight against the Philistines, and to give us safety and protection. It is that pressure mainly made them to move forward a king, asking for a king. In that case, the last judge or the first prophet is called Prophet Samuel. Prophet Samuel asks of God on behalf of the Israel people for a king. Then God gives them a king in the person of Saul from the Benjaminite family. Tall and well-built structure. And the initial times, Saul was very successful, very especially in the first book of Samuel, 11th chapter, 13th chapter, we see the glorious winning battlefields of Saul. At the same time, Saul was very short time the king, and soon he failed, he disobeyed God, and how miserably he is ending his story in 1 Samuel 20th chapter, that first verse we see. Saul was very much inadequate in very many ways in implementing the plan of God, and he is discarded from the sight of God. From Saul, one thing we have to understand, in Hebrew language, there are 2 terms that are used. One is Melech, that means king. Other one is Nagid, that means prince. Till the time of Saul, they were using the word Nagid, prince only. Then only after Saul, when David comes, Solomon comes, and the other kings, they come into the picture, they use the word Melech, the king. So that is the starting point of the monarchy. Now, after Saul, David comes to the throne. His throne beginning is a very humble beginning. A shepherd boy, forgotten, insignificant, taking care of the sheep in the outer field, was called by God, anointed by God, and he became the king of Israel. David is one of the very important and successful king. Even today, Israel people, for their national flag, they have the Star of David in their national flag. For them, Davidic period is a golden period. It is a very important period. So, David united the northern kingdom and southern kingdom and ruled from Hebron for 7 years. From then, he moved on to Jerusalem, conquered the Jebusite city, and from Jerusalem, he ruled the country. And he had prosperity and wealth was flourishing in the land, and the people were very much happy about the rule of David. After David, we have Solomon. Solomon comes to the throne after the order of David coming to the throne. There are throne succession conflicts and fights were there. Even then, Solomon succeeds in the fight and said, Solomon is known for wisdom. In the Old Testament, Torah is known for Moses. Psalms are known for David. And finally, we have Solomon for wisdom. These are the three people very popular in the Old Testament, in the traditional understanding. Solomon is known for wisdom through his international contract and the treaties with the kings and the princes. He expanded his territory. And also through the marriage relationship, he brought the country to a stability and a good governance. And his wisdom is known to everybody. The Queen of Sheba from east, she come to visit Solomon. And that's how Solomon divided the whole country into 12 provinces. Each province, the governor was there. Then each province was divided into small districts, and districts were containing the treasury, and also the tax collecting facilities. And the tax collected from the districts were sent to the province. Province money was sent to the central Jerusalem. Now, another important thing in the reign of Solomon is the building of Jerusalem temple. Solomon built a temple at Jerusalem. That means the royal God, the royal religion, that goes hand in hand. By building Jerusalem temple, he made one sanctuary for God, the whole nation to come together and to gather in Jerusalem to worship Yahweh. A centralized governance, a centralized worship was achieved by Solomon. After Solomon, things were not so great. Even during the time of Solomon, there were plenty of building projects. And Solomon married so many wives and he had so many concubines. For them, he built the palaces and palatial buildings and temple of Solomon and other so many other building projects he undertook. Due to that, people were taken for bonded labor, and they have to contribute either by cash or by time. They have to work in the building projects or they contribute the money. People are a little disgusted. Later on, after Solomon, the conflict between the northern kingdom and southern kingdom, Judah and Benjamin and other tribes were having the conflict. In the year 926, or some people say 922, the northern kingdom separated itself from the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom ruled by the Davidic dynasty, descendants of David, and keeping Jerusalem as a capital city. Judah, south, Jerusalem is a capital. Whereas northern kingdom was ruled by non-Davidic descendants. Very many people were become the kings of the northern kingdom. It has constantly, capriciously changing capitals also. Shechem, Phanuel, Tirza were the capitals of the northern kingdom. Finally, during the time of Omri, in the year 880, Samaria became the capital of northern kingdom. The northern kingdom continued to exist for some more time. In the year 722, the people disobeyed God, violated the covenant, went against the laws of God. Justice was not practiced in the land. The Lord handed over the people of Israel to the Assyrians. Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, and thereby the fall of northern kingdom in the hands of Assyria. The southern kingdom continued to exist for another 200 years or so, and they are ruled by the good kings, Ezekiah, Menachem, Josiah, and so many other kings were ruling the northern kingdom. Josiah time, there was a conflict between the Pharaoh Necho and Josiah, and he interrupted his passage passing through his country, and he met in war in Megiddo, and when the war Josiah was killed. And Josiah was one wonderful kings of the southern kingdom, and he was reviving the Yahweh religion in the land. And later on, due to his sudden death, the Yahwistic reform in the land was abruptly ended, and the people became wonderstruck. And how could it could happen for us? That was the northern kingdom. In the year after that, there was not so popular kings in the southern kingdom. There were Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and other people. Throne succession was there, and revolt against Babylon was there. In 597, Babylonian army took over Jerusalem and the land of Israel, the land of Judah. And in 587, Nebuchadnezzar's army came into the land and conquered Jerusalem and took the people in captivity. That is the story of the southern kingdom. Northern kingdom ending in 722, southern kingdom ending in 587, the fall. There comes the exile. Exile is a very important, vital point in the people of Israel. The Jerusalem temple was destroyed, the kings were kidnapped, and the people were taken in exile, chained, and they were taken to far off countries. There comes the real crisis for the people. Not only political crisis, not only economical crisis, but also faith crisis. If the God were to be powerful, why did he allow us to be the slaves of the Babylonians? That was the faith crisis. At the same time, exile was a very beautiful time, a fruitful time of the scriptures. The Old Testament was recollected and history was written, and Pentateuch and Deuteronomy historical books were finalized during this particular time. That is Babylonian exile. Very especially Isaiah and Ezekiel were the prophets who were prophesying among the people during the time of Babylonian captivity. Now we move on from Babylonian captivity, we move on to the Persian Empire. In the year 538, King Cyrus became the Persian emperor and he conquered Babylon. Because he conquered Babylon, the Persian king set the people of Israel liberated from Babylon and they can go back. Vast majority of people came back to the land of Judah and Israel, and other people remained in Babylon itself. That's how two things were happening simultaneously. The people who came back from the Babylonian exile, they came back, rebuilt the temple, revitalized the community, regenerated their spirit, and they were to start a new life on the land once again. It is during this particular time, Ezra, Nehemiah, where the prophets were supporting them. Ahai and Zechariah and Malachi were the prophets were prophesying on behalf of the people to build the temple and to revive Yahweh religion unto them. The temple was rebuilt and rededicated. And from there, we move on to Alexander period. In the year 333, Alexander the Great captured many of the Middle East countries. And for the next 600 years, from 300 BCE to 300 CE, Common Era in the New Testament, the Greek language became the language of the region. Middle East and all other countries were conquered by Alexander the Great. After Alexander, the Nicanor, Ptolemies, and Seleucids were dividing the land of Alexander and they ruled on their part. The Greek language was imposed upon the people of Israel. The Greek culture of the Greek Hellenization, the Greek culture was imposed upon the people. There was a conflict among the people of Israel whether to follow the Greek culture or to be sticking on to their Yahweh religion. There was persecution and cast upon the people. Antiochus Epiphanes, the Greek king, was really fanatic about the Greek culture and religion, imposed Greek rules, culture, and its customs and manners upon the Hebrew people. The Torah was burned, and the synagogues were destroyed, and the temple was desecrated, and anyone who practices the Jewish religion was discouraged. There was a great persecution. It is during this particular time, book of Daniel was written, a book of the persecution times. And a particular group, a people called Mattathias family, revolutionary resistant group, very especially from the family of Mattathias and his sons, notably Judas Maccabeus and others, were fighting against these Greek people, Greek culture and cultural impositions. The Hasmoneans fought vigorously against this Hellenization. They tried to strengthen the people in their Jewish faith and finally Judah conquered Jerusalem in the year 164. The temple was rededicated, and there was autonomy for the people of Israel from the hands of the Greeks, and Asmodeans enjoyed the political independence and ruled the country till 142. But the Romans took over under Pompey in the year 63. From then onwards and into the New Testament period, the Romans were ruling the people of Israel, and the people were under the clutches of the Roman Empire. The Hasmonean king Herod ruled the country from 40 BCE to 4 BCE, and he was puppet in the hand of the Romans. Later on, when Jewish Palestinian Jews revolted against the Rome in 132 under the leadership of Bar Kokhba, the revolt was terribly suppressed, and Jerusalem was recaptured in the year 134, and it became a Roman colony. During the time of Jesus, a little before that, the governors of Romans were ruling Judea and other parts. That's how the history of the Old Testament, starting from the patriarchal period right up to the Roman period, we have covered. This is a small history. Sometimes it's monotonous. Sometimes it may be a little difficult to understand. But this is the history of Israel from the time of Abraham right up to the time of Romans. Now we go to the next point, talking about the formation of the Old Testament. How did the Old Testament evolve into being? Basically, because the books were not written then and there. Rather, many ways it has been passed over to the many generations, and finally it evolved into a book. In the beginning, some of the important faith confessions, important proclamations were proclaimed, and they were uttered in the liturgical centers, in the cultic centers. The people were having a faith. Book of Deuteronomy, 26th chapter, when we have, my father is wandering around, and he went down to Egypt to live there, and there we increased and multiplied. There the Pharaoh became jealous, and he was persecuting us. We cried unto God. The God came to our rescue with a mighty arm and outstretched hands, and he has liberated us, and gave us this promised land, and now we are here. The faith confession is there. Such faith confessions were celebrated and proclaimed at the cultic centers, Gilgal, Bethel, Dan, and these are the places where the people come together for cultic worship. They were confessing. Important yearly festivals, Paschal festival, or any other Boot festival, or any other festivals, they were retelling the story of their salvation, and they celebrated their faith. It is through this oral tradition, generation to generation, it was formed. For the first time in the history of Israel, Solomonic period was the time where the history was written down. Mainly because this particular time, the royal kingdom wanted to write down their history and to keep the record of their own kingdoms. That's how we have the Solomonic period. We have the Yahwistic tradition, Elohisic tradition, Deuteronomic tradition, and priestly traditions. 4 traditions. I will talk about these 4 traditions later part. The people were from various traditions. They were started writing the Bible, and the Bible was being written over the centuries and over the long period of time. The oral tradition was converted to written tradition. Written traditions were redacted, and finally become into Old Testament containing various sections. Now we have the Old Testament in 3 parts. The 3 parts of the Old Testament. The first one is Torah. Second one is Nevi'im, the prophets. The third one is Ketuvim, that is the wisdom literature. 3 parts. I need to say one small explanation. Torah is the kernel of the Old Testament. It is the kernel around which the prophets were written. When we put the Torah as one dot, around which we can make a circle, then the bigger circle is wisdom literature. Wisdom literature is nothing but a spiritual reflection of the Torah. Prophetic literature is nothing but application of Torah into the practical life of the people. Thus, for the Old Testament, the most important section is Torah itself. It contains the laws of God that are given to Moses and handed over to the people, the Torah. Now, When we talk about the authorship of Torah, we have a small crisis. Take for example, traditionally it is held that Moses is the author of the Pentateuch. Penta means 5. Prota, Deutero, Trita, Tetra, Penta. 1, 2, 3 in Greek language. Penta means 5. 5 books in the Hebrew Bible. First 5 books are called Torah or Pentateuch. Teuch means tools or instrument or the scroll. The 5 scrolls were written and they were made into one section called the Torah. This Torah is written by Moses. It was believed concept. Traditionally, they believed the people of Israel. But in the 12th century, even before that, Ibn Ezra, a rabbi, challenged this idea, authorship of Moses to the book of Pentateuch. Basically, because in the Old Testament, the death of Moses is referred in the book of in the Pentateuch itself, in the book of Deuteronomy. If the death of Moses were to be recorded in the books of the Pentateuch, how can Moses be the author of the Pentateuch? That was the question. Secondly, there were a lot of repetitions. Take for example, Abraham telling his wife as a sister, that story is told at least thrice. The story of Hagar is referred at least twice. Then the beginning of the story of Joseph is told at least in 2 times. That's how. There is a lot of triplets and doublets were there in the Old Testament. So they were looking for real authorship. Who is the real author? Certainly, Moses is not the author of the Pentateuch, but rather they attributed this authorship to 4 traditions. What are these 4 traditions? 4 traditions are nothing but J, E, D, B. 4 sources. What are the 4 sources? J stands for Yahweh tradition. In German language, Yahweh is spelled as Jehovah with J. So the first word is J, Yahweh tradition. In the Yahweh tradition, the people of Israel are calling the God as their own God, God of their own God, the transcendent God who talks to the people very directly and relates with them. It belonged to the 9th century. The sources belonging to the 9th century. It indicates that God's promise with Abraham was fulfilled in David, and Davidic Empire is a fulfillment of God's providence, God's promise. It underlines that God loves whom He chooses. The tradition is reflected in the books of Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers. It is not found in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. However, book of Deuteronomy, 34th chapter, belonging to this particular tradition. Since this tradition addresses God as Yahweh, it's called Yahweh tradition. This mainly because from the southern tradition. At the same time, southern kingdom, during the time of Solomon and little later part, the traditions were put down in writing and the Yahweh tradition was there. At the same time, we have around the same time, in around the 8th or 7th century or 9th century, we have the traditions of Elohistic tradition. It Israel was divided into 2, Judah and Jerusalem. The northern tradition, that developed a tradition by the Elohist people who address God as Elohim, and these people understand God as a transcendent being, far off. He communicates only through angels and dreams, and he is far off reality. For them, it's a non-Davidic relationship. Non-Davidic relationship was highlighted very much. The Davidic kingdom was not given much importance, and the centralization of Jerusalem was not so much given importance. But later on, down to Bethel, the kingdom is divided. Jeroboam established sanctuaries in Dan and in Bethel, tried to divert the mind of the people. Accordingly, this tradition reflects anti-Jerusalem perspective. It was probably written during the time of 9th century in the northern kingdom. The first 11 chapters after the first 11 chapters of book of Genesis, this particular tradition is held, and it is seen in the major portion of the book of Exodus and the whole book of Leviticus. This tradition is attributed. And secondly, little later part, when the Yahweh tradition, Elohist traditions belonging to years 10th and the 9th century was corrupted by the pagan practices and disloyalty, and then there comes the 2 divisions of the northern kingdom and southern kingdom. So the northern people, they have a group called Deuteronomists. They were faithful to the law, and they were the northern tradition people, prophetic orientations. They collected the materials belonging to the northern kingdom after the fall of the northern kingdom. Then they come to south. They redacted the history of Israel. And for them, the prophetic orientations are very important. The covenant is also important. Centralized Jerusalem cultic worship also important. That is another northern tradition. It is preserved in the Deuteronomic tradition. After the exile or during the exile, there comes a priestly class. This group of people were contributing a lot towards the formation of the Pentateuch. They finally redacted the J tradition, E tradition, D tradition, and makes their own implications. Being the priests, they give importance to cultic laws, rubrics, rituals, feasts, and festivities, worship, and the Jerusalem temple. So we have four traditions: J, E, D, P. J and P belong to southern tradition, E and D belonging to northern tradition. Four traditions over the long period of time wrote down the Pentateuch, and these four traditions were combined together, redacted, edited to form the Old Pentateuch. That's how we have the Pentateuch history. With it, I want to make a small break. You make your own questions by you share with the convener, and we can answer the questions. We make a small break. Afterwards, we'll come back to the world of the Old Testament, the cosmology of the Old Testament, other entities that we will come to talk about. If you have any query, please be free to ask or to share with the moderator. We will talk about that one. Hope you have enjoyed the class. God bless you.
Okay, thank you very much, Father, for a beautiful summary of the history of the Old Testament, various kingdoms involved and personalities, and also the formation of the Old Testament. Now, Father will have a small break. Then, meanwhile, I have something to share with you, some information. If anybody have any question, please direct questions, put it in the chat. So then Father can answer maybe after the second class. So briefly, if you have any doubts, you write and be read or can answer. Now, these classes and other some informations. First of all, some may know, some may not know. Already the CCBA Commission for Bible. So that is the organizer of this program. And this CCBA Commission for Bible, among other many activities that it is doing, from last February, we have launched what is called St. Paul Bible College. So St. Paul Bible College is an online college and also a correspondence course we are offering. So the online correspondence course is already on, and many are attending it, hundreds of them. And you can visit our website, stpaulbiblecollege.com, stpaulbiblecollege.com. So you can register there itself, giving your data, and that costs rupees 2,000 online correspondence course. So if you will get the lessons online itself, and you can read the lesson, and then at the end there will be a small assessment. So like that, the course goes for 2 years. This of 24 lessons. So first year will be the Old Testament, and the second year will be the New Testament. So in your time, in your convenience, you can read the text, lessons, and answer them, and you can come to know the whole Bible. So we try to cover the whole Bible in 2 years' time. So accordingly, every month we cover one lesson as a class on the last Sunday of that month. So last month we had the first lesson. It is called General Introduction to Bible. So Professor Assisi Saldana gave the first talk on Introduction to Bible, and this month we are having Introduction to the Old Testament. And next month we will start from Genesis. So next month, last Sunday of this month of August, we will have class for Book of Genesis. But only a change, as Bishop has already noted. So we offer only to the students from next month. So if you're interested, if you like this way of doing and you want to know more, see actually what we are giving is very little of what is in the lesson. So the lesson is nearly 20 to 30 or 40 pages of lesson. We are trying to summarize only the important things. That's why Father has to go a little bit fast also, because he has to cover within 2 hours all these important things. So if you are interested and if you think learning Bible will be useful for our knowledge and also for our life, you kindly subscribe or enroll yourself as a student. And if you have any doubts, you can anytime write to us, call us. The details are there in the website. So that is a online Bible correspondence course. So the classes from next month will be available only for the students at 4 p.m. in the evening, 4 to 6 p.m. So there will not be morning class from next month. And also we are trying for another attempt correspondence by post, correspondence post by post. So because of lockdown, that is somewhat held up. We will start soon. And if anybody finds it difficult with the online and catch up with the modern technology, they can very well write to us. The applications are there in our website, and then books will be sent by post. The same material, but it will be conducted through post, and it costs only 500 rupees. So we want to reach to many people, even any corner of this country, and so therefore we kept it very minimum 500 rupees. So you can also spread to others. Anybody want to do the same course, they post rupees 500. Anytime they can apply to us, and as soon as the lockdown is over, we'll start that course also. So these two courses that we are offering for those who want to know more about the Bible. So that is a thing. And so now, Father, are you ready? Can we
Ready? Yeah.
two questions are there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we take up first, where is the Ark of the Covenant now?
Okay. It's a really a tricky question. It's a beautiful question also. When the people of Israel built the Jerusalem temple under the leadership of Solomon, even before that, during the time of David, the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Jerusalem. When the temple was built, the Ark of the Covenant was kept inside the Holy of Holies, Sanctorum they call it. During the time of the exile in the Babylonian captivity, when the Nebuchadnezzar's army invaded Jerusalem, there is a theory the Ark of the Covenant was carried by the Babylonians into Babylon, being the gold and the silver, and it was carried. There's a theory. And the last reference that we have about the Ark of the Covenant, apart from Pentateuch, is Book of Jeremiah. In the Book of Jeremiah, we have a reference to the Ark of the Covenant, and that the Ark of the Covenant was referred last. And finally, in the New Testament, in the Book of Revelation, we see the Ark of the Covenant coming down from heaven and coming to the earth. That's what the references are there. These references are there. But nobody knows where the Ark of the Covenant at present is all about. There is a movie called Raiders of the Heart by David Crescent and I think Ford. It's a movie. It talks about the people searching for the Ark of the Covenant. Various theories and various ideas and novels have been written, but nobody knows where the Ark of the Covenant. After the book of Jeremiah, there is no reference to the Ark of the Covenant in the Old Testament. That is a fact that we know. We don't know where it is.
Okay, there is another question regarding the tradition, JEPP.
Yeah.
So they are not clear about the last one, P, whether it is P or P, whether it stands for Pentateuch or priestly. So kindly four traditions.
Yeah, there is a four traditions. The first one is J, Yahweh tradition. They call God as Yahweh in the northern country, in the southern kingdom, during the time of Solomon, 10th century or 11th century, it belongs to. E tradition, basically because they address God as Elohim. In the Hebrew word Elohim means God or gods. Elohim, Elohim's tradition, belonging to northern tradition and dating back to 9th century or 8th century. Further, the northern tradition, the later part, the development of the E tradition was done by the D tradition, Deuteronomic tradition, Deuteronomous. They are the tribe who are responsible for the laws and very especially in the book of Deuteronomy, this Deuteronomy tradition is there. The last one, I'm sorry, I just rushed through. Those was the end. They're wanting for a break, I think. I suppose you understand me. This P tradition. P stands for priestly tradition. They are the authors of the priestly class and the priestly tribe. They are responsible for this tradition. Those who are working in the temple, engaged in cultic activities, and they were very much concentrating on the temple, worship, feasts, festivities, purity, impurity, holy, unholy. These were their concern. And the people are belonging to the temple tradition. Temple tradition belong to the south. They are the priestly tradition. They were the final people who were redacting the whole of Pentateuch into the final form. They call it in technical terms, they call it P, and post P, they call it priestly tradition. Post priestly tradition, they talk about it. On the whole, JEDP documentary hypothesis, now it's not so much valid. They talk about the P and non-P traditions. P and non-P traditions. That is, priestly tradition and Deuteronomy traditions were said to be the major source of ideology. Today, we hold on to that idea. Priestly, non-priestly. These are the two traditions. Today, the recent research in the Pentateuch holds upon these two traditions.
Okay.
Hope I explained to you.
Yeah. So in the Bible, when reading how to categorize the different traditions, whether it is Yahweh or Elohistic or D or P, so how to find out?
That's the one thing is, when we read the Pentateuch, whenever the word Yahweh appears, then we get the belonging to Yahweh tradition, at least one portion. And whenever the word is Elohim appears, the simplest way to identify is Elohim's tradition. And there are some theological points are also there. Like, for example, in the Yahweh tradition, the God is close to the people, talking to them directly, appearing them in the burning bush, talking to the person directly, and calling for the plan of God, and stand for God communicates directly. Whereas the E tradition, the God is a transcendent reality, far off reality. He talks to the people and vision. These are some of the areas, some of the ideas we have to understand. The Deuteronomistic tradition, when we talk about the simplest way to identify is hortatoric style or exhortatoric style, they call it. The language is repetitive, little monotonous, and they were talking about the same thing repeatedly, saying long sentence constructions, very especially in the book of Deuteronomy, 5 sermons of Moses are belonging to this particular tradition. When we have more insistence upon holy, unholy, pure, impure, temple, cult, all these things are belonging to P tradition. We have developed much more to identify the sources, but these are the simplest way to identify the sources.
Okay, one last question, and then we'll take up after the second session. If you have any doubts, you keep on writing into the chat. One question now is, so this is only the first 5 books or for the full Bible? The 5 traditions are
5 traditions. 4 traditions mainly for the first 5 books that what we called about Pentateuch, JEDP tradition. It's called documentary hypothesis. Documentary hypothesis. Julius Wellhausen in 18th century he proposed this theory, and this was popular up until now. Today we talk about these 4 traditions into 2 traditions, mainly human. One more thing is we have to understand, even in the prophetic literature, we have the Deuteronomistic tradition, they call it. The continuation of the D people having a little more wider circle, they turn out to be the Deuteronomistic tradition, they call it. Historical books, Joshua, Judges, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 King, 2 King. These are the books, Deuteronomistic tradition. That is to be seen in the later part of the Bible. But the 4 traditions made it to be identified in the Pentateuch. That will be the correct answer.
Okay. So now we will stop here the question answers. So you can carry on with your next session. Then 5 minutes or 10 minutes before 2 o'clock, we'll stop. We'll take again 1 or 2 questions, and we'll come. Okay,
thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interaction. That shows that you are actively involved in participating in the talk, and you are very beautifully put forward your questions. Thank you so much. God bless you. Now we come to the second part of the lecture. where we have the history of Israel and the formation of the world Pentateuch, we saw that one. Now we move on to the world of the Bible. The biblical world, the great civilizations were started on the river beds, very important one. In India, Ganges and Brahmaputra, so the cradle of cultures. In the same way, the biblical world not only pertaining to Palestine, the surrounding regions also. Take for example, the biblical Palestine is also related to Egypt. The biblical world is also related to Babylon. The biblical world, Palestine, is also related to Assyria and other small countries also. So, take for example, on the riverbed of Nile, we have Egyptian culture. Then we have on the riverbeds of Euphrates and Tigris, we have Mesopotamian culture. On the riverbeds of Jordan, we have Israelite culture. That's how we have the riverbeds, the cradle of cultures. Now, starting from Babylon right up to Egypt down, if we make a circle, it forms a crescent-like structure. Starting to Babylon, Assyria, Egypt, Palestine, Egypt, it forms a crescent-like structure. So they call it fertile crescent countries. In this region, Europe, Asia, Africa, all the three continents converge together. Very especially, biblical world consists of Palestine and also Mesopotamia, Assyria and Egypt and other countries. Take for example, I told you in the last class, the Israel people were under the clutches of the Romans and also the clutches of the Greek people, Hellenist people. So automatically, all these countries, they become the biblical world. And today to talk about the modern Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Iran, Iraq and Turkey. These were the countries of the modern day period belonging to the biblical world of the ancient times. We have to understand that particular one. In the blog, after this talk, I will put a small blog in our website talking about the map of Israel and also the Fertile Crescent and all other things you can see very well by way of tool and subsidiary materials. Now, to talk about Palestine, geography of the Palestine, geography of the Palestine, the territory is in the book of Judges, 10th chapter, 1st verse, from Dan to Beersheba. From Dan to Beersheba, that's the main. But in fact, the Palestine was still larger than what is told here. In the north, Mount Hermon, south, Negev desert, reaching towards Egypt. On the west, we have the Mediterranean Sea. On the east, we have the Jordan Valley. North Hermon, south, we have the Negev desert. And the west, we have the Mediterranean Sea. And we have the east, we have the Jordan Valley. This is the territory of the Palestine. And it's called all the land of Canaan. In other places, land of promise extends as per the Hamath, modern Syria, to the Egypt. In the book of Numbers, 34th chapter, we have little wider territory also we see. David and Solomon ruled Israel, a wider territory that is even bigger than the promise that is made to Abraham. You have to understand that particular perspective also. Then, now the whole land of Israel is divided into 6 categories. 6 divisions are there. I will not go into detailed manner the geographical divisions. I want to just highlight, spell out the names of the 6 sections. Then I'll talk about the climate and also the rainfall and other categories where we will be able to understand the Bible better. The sea coast, that is the coastal plain, it is the first territory. Second one, the central mountain and the mountainous regions, the central portion. The third one, the desert and closer to Dead Sea and the south of Dead Sea, the third part. Fourth part, we have the Jordan Valley and the Jordan Plains we have. And fifth one, fertile and dry regions in the Jordan Valley. Totally we have into 5 sections we have, 5 regions we have. Then we have the seasons. Israel has only 2 seasons, dry season and rainy season. Approximately from the month of December to March, we have the dry season. Now we have the rainy season. December to March, we have the rainy season. Even after March, there were some little rains were there. They are called farmer rains. And the dry season will be from the month of May to September. At the end of the dry season, there may be little rains. They are called the former rains in the Old Testament. The rainfall. Rainfall is mainly during the rainfall is the Jordan Valley and Jordan regions for the and a very poor rainfall in the desert, Negev desert and the Dead Sea area. The Dead Sea is just below the sea level, and it contains no water being going away from the land. It is very dried up, and it is a Dead Sea. Dead Sea is no creatures are there, and one of the important tourist center also. Then we move on to the climatic changes. Climatic changes. The patriarchal, from the time of patriarchal period up until now, there may be a change of climatical conditions, they say. But far and wide, we have the same time. We have the December area, the rainy season, and also the March, December, and December to March. Then a little later, the dry season also we have. The cause of the decrease of the cultivable land compared to the earlier period is mainly to the human occupations and the cattle. Many trees were cut down, and the rain decreased significantly with the change of climate. It is a human-made reality in the land, the whole world. It affects the Holy Land also. Everywhere the concrete jungles have come in, and the rainfall is little less compared to other patients. Now I want to just highlight one single point, that is the political significance of the geography. Take for example, from Egypt right up to Babylon, there the via Maris, via the seaway, the King's Way, passing by. The route was passing through Palestine, from Egypt to Palestine and other countries. So automatically, all the trade people were passing through one country to another big empires. They have to pass through Palestine. So Palestine became the neck of this area. And Turkey is said to be the sick man of Europe, we say, because many of the battles were fought in Turkey. Same way, many of the battles were being held in Palestine. The Palestine become the bone of contention for many of the superior powers, whereby they can have the international trade route on that way. During the time of Ahmose, there was stable governance, and the good reign of the kings were there. So automatically they have prosperity of wealth, and in the prosperity of wealth they went away from God. That is the book of Amos also talks about that one. The politically, it is the very important, significant trade route is there. And anyone to pass through the Palestine, the king way they have to use it. That's also politically, it's very significant. The placement of Palestine in the world map is very significant, even today also. Theologically, the land is blessed by rain and Jordan River. Apart from that, they have the people. The land was occupied by the Canaanites. Then later on, by the people of Israel, occupied the land. Theologically, we have to understand one simple point. In the Canaanite culture, there is two gods were there, Baal and Asherah. Baal is a male god and Asherah is a female god. When they come together, there is a fertility of seasons, good rain, good showers, and fertility of the land, it is there. When these two gods, Baal and Asherah, got separated, that becomes a dry season. Then automatically there is a scarcity of water and no rainfall, and summer season, dry season is there. So automatically, when the people of Israel occupy the land of Canaan, these kind of pagan practices and practice ideology came into the mind of the people. For the people of Israel, as long as they were passing through the desert, they were feeling that Yahweh is the God of the mountains, God of the desert. Once they reached the land of Canaan, they thought no more Yahweh, but the Baal God and Asherah God alone can help them. So they abandoned the ways of Yahweh and trying to follow the Baal religion. The prophets were terribly condemning such opportunistic attitude of the Israel people and brought the people back to Yahweh. Yahweh is the raider of the clouds, and he is the God of the rainings and good showers. In the book of First Kings, we see God orders Elijah to spell out, and Elijah shuts the heavens and the heavens for 3 years and 6 months. There's a famine in the land. It is due to Yahweh alone. That is the God. He is God of the nature, God of the. And I want to highlight one more point: Hebrew cosmology. Hebrew cosmology is a semicircular world. The whole world the heavens were supported by the two pillars coming down from the earth underworld, and the whole world is divided into three parts. The upper firmament of the firmament, then the earth, underworld, the Sheol. The three-part division is there. The Sheol is the world of the darkness. The people of the dead will be living there. The dead souls go to Sheol. That's what we believe for the Hebrew people. Then the earth was occupied by the human persons, and the God was dwelling in the heavens. And there were the tanks and the facilities to God opens the gates of the heavens and pours down hails and snow and rain. That was the understanding. The whole world was supported by two pillars coming down from the Sheol, reaching up to the heavens. When the mountains of pillars of the mountains were shaken, there comes the earthquake. That is the understanding of the Hebrew people. There is understanding of the Hebrew cosmology we have to understand. From there we move on. The Old Testament literature and other literature. Now, when we see the Old Testament, the first 11, at least first 11 chapters we have, the prehistory we have. How the world came into being, how God created the world. These are some of the probing questions for the people of Israel. When they went to Babylon, when they encountered with the other cultures, when they encountered with other nations, they come in contact with other religions, other cultures, and thereby being influenced by them also. That's how we have to understand the literature of the ancient Near East also. Take for example, there were plenty of mythical stories in the Babylonian and Egyptian cultures were there. These myths were very much influential for the people of Israel to create their own creation stories. Take, for example, what is a myth? Myth comes from the Greek word called mythos. Myth, in short, is the story of God and goddesses or god-men. They explain certain basic truths which cannot be scientifically proved mythological stories. Take, for example, Egyptian literature we have. In the Egyptian literature, the sun god. The literature of the Egypt is influenced by the topography. Egypt was very land of sunshine. When the sun is rising in the east, the people are so happy. They were very much saddened to see the setting of the sun. So automatically, a good sunshine was there. So automatically, the people were taught the sun god is the ultimate superior god, and they considered sun to be the super god for the people of Egypt. They were unaware of the scientific truths. Sun god said to be the god of God. They worshipped the sun god. The pharaoh Askenaton composed a following hymn, which I will read the hymn as such, how they were addressed to sun god. Thou appearest beautifully on the horizons of the heaven, the living atom, the beginning of life, all the world, they do their work. O sun, you are great. That the sun becomes the god for them. Whereas in the people of Israel, the sun is not God, but rather is created by God. God is far more superior than the sun itself. That was the understanding of the people of Israel. And same way, in Egyptian cultures, there is a creation story. Take for example, in the Egyptian papyrus found in the year 1100 years from 950, there is a small story about the creation that says, Nud, the god of the heavens, is joining with the god Cave, the god of the earth. It is being separated by the wind god Chu. So automatically, because of the separation, the heaven and the earth were formed. The same way in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, when we study about how God created the light and the darkness, and the big light for the day and the small light for the night, and separated day and night, we have separations. These kind of ideas would have been come from being influenced by the Egyptian cultures and the mythological stories. Then we come to the second one, a Mesopotamian culture, they have another beautiful story called Enuma Elish story. This story is very much influential, very especially for the people of Israel to conceive their own idea of creation. In the Enuma Elish story, we have a male god, Apsu, and a female god, Tiamat. Because of the union between Apsu and Tiamat, there were plenty of petty gods, small gods were born. The Apsu was sleeping. The small gods were disturbing the sleep of Apsu. Apsu wanted to do away with the small gods, and at the time, Ea, a small god, intervenes and kills Apsu. And now the female god Tiamat is so ferocious. The Ea small god also gets relationship sexual union with another small god and begets Marduk. When Tiamat, the companion of Apsu, wanted to take revenge against the small gods, the small gods were going and pleading with Marduk god and asking God's intervention. Marduk fights against Tiamat and they cuts into Tiamat into two portions. The upper part of Tiamat is he created the heaven. The lower part of Tiamat he creates the earth. That's how the creation story of the Enuma Elish story is being spoken in the Mesopotamian cultures. When the people of Israel went to Babylon, when they encountered into this kind of ways, then they create a counter culture. Take for example, what happens in the creation story of the Israel people. In the Israel people, God is not moved, God is not engaged in war, God is not disturbed by any other activities. Just like a superpower, He sits by the word, the logos, dabar, from the word, the logos, God creates the. Let there be light, God says, and light is created. In Egyptian culture, sun is a supreme God, ray. Whereas for the people of Israel, sun is only a created object of the Yahweh God. That's how God creates. In the first 3 days, God creates. In the next 3 days, He decorates. And 7th day, He rests. And rests. So to say, the creation stories of the Hebrew people, Israel people are counterculture to these kind of influential Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Hebrew cultures. This one. Now we have to understand that. Take for example, there is another story called a Gilgamesh story, which is very much influential and very much similar to the story of flood story of the Noah. Gilgamesh and the little works is found in Mesopotamia. A person called Gilgamesh living around 3000 years before from now on, and he lived in a place called Urartu, and he was known for his wisdom and knowledge. And on seeing his wisdom and knowledge, Ishtar, a god, wants to marry Gilgamesh, but Gilgamesh does not agree upon the proposal. So Ishtar is so much jealous and so much angry, sends a bull to kill Gilgamesh. Then Gilgamesh, along with his companion Enki, kills the bull. When the bull was killed, all the petty minor gods were angry against Gilgamesh and Enki, his companion. So they make a war. In the war, Enki was killed. On seeing Enki being put to death, Gilgamesh becomes so sad. If death is more powerful than anything else, how to attain immortality? That was the question of Gilgamesh. Then he hears about Utnapishtim. One Utnapishtim was living in a far off place, has a secret of the immortality. Then he meets Utnapishtim and asks about the way to attain the immortality and to regain the youthful days and to live ever young. Then Utnapishtim tells him that already he has escaped the flood of the Babylon and he survived and his man said to be the immortal man. And he talks about a far off region under the sea water, there is a plant. If you see the plant, automatically if you eat it and you will have the immortality. Then Gilgamesh goes for underwent a huge voyage and goes for in search of this one. Finally, after much hurdles and puzzles, and he finds out that plant and taking that and coming back. And while coming back, holding the plant in his hands, he saw a pool. So he keeps down the plant on the banks and gets into the pool for a bath. When he comes out of the pool, he sees a snake coming and eating and swallowing the whole plant. Having been saddened by that one lost opportunity, Gilgamesh comes back. This is one of the stories of the Babylonian mythology. This story has a lot of references to our biblical creation stories and flood stories also. Take for example, the appearance of the smoke snake coming and eating the plant and wanting to be immortal. And these are some of the ideas very much influential for the stories of the creation stories and other flood stories. That's how we have to understand when we study about the first 11 chapters of the book of Pentateuch. We have to understand it's a prehistory being influenced by various cultures and times of that time, and accordingly we have to understand in a proper manner. Further more explanations will be given in the blog. You can refer the blog. Now I come to the divisions of the books of the Old Testament. With that, I'll conclude my lecture. That is divisions of the Old Testament. The divisions of the Old Testament is, I told you in the earlier, that Torah, Nevi'im, Ketubim. That is the Hebrew way of dividing the Bible. Hebrew way of dividing the Bible. Totally 13 books in the Bible. They talk about the Hebrew way of talking. Whereas when we talk about the Catholics, book of Genesis to the Deuteronomy, we have 5 books called the Pentateuch. Secondly, from Joshua to Esther, we have the historical books, 14 books. Then we have from Job to Ecclesiastes, 7 wisdom books. They are called poetry or wisdom literature. From Isaiah, we have right up to 2nd Maccabees, we have 20 books. They are the prophetical writings, they have it. So automatically, Pentateuch 5 books, historical books 14 books, then we have wisdom literature 7 books, and the prophetic literature 20 books, including first and 2nd Maccabees. Totally we have 46 books. Whereas our Protestant brethren do not accept certain books of the Bible, Old Testament. Take for example, they accept all the 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis to Deuteronomy, 5 books they accept. Then they have the 12 books of the historical books they accept, except Tobit and Judith, they don't agree upon as a canonical book. Then in the wisdom literature, the Catholics have the 7 books we have, whereas the Protestants, they have only 5 books. They don't accept the wisdom of Solomon and Ecclesiasticus. The 2 books they don't accept. And we take, for example, in the book of the prophetic literature, we have this. They have 17 books, including 1st and 2nd Maccabees. We have 17 books, except the Baruch and 1st and Maccabees. They totally 7 books. They don't accept. So totally, in the Protestant versions, they have only 39 books, whereas we have 46 books. We have. Now to talk about little bit of the Pentateuch. We talk about Pentateuchos. I told you already. It is referred in the New Testament as a book of laws. Gospel of Luke, 24th chapter, 14th verse. The events are completed, comparable to the laws that give life and that gives wisdom. Pentateuch is also called the law of Moses. The 2nd Chronicles, 30th chapter, 16th verse, refers to the law of Moses. And the book of Ezra, 10th chapter, 3rd verse, refers to the Pentateuch as a law of holy laws. And book of holy laws, Nehemiah, 8th chapter, 3rd verse, it talks about. I told you about when we talk about the history of Israel, I elaborately talked about the patriarchal history, Exodus history, and Joshua and Judges we talked about. The Pentateuch, what we need to understand is 2 kinds of literatures are there. One is narrative literature, that is stories of the patriarchs, narrative literature. Legal literature, that is laws and norms of life. We have to understand the stories of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and so on and so forth. They are the narrative literature. The narrative literature is something like the story forms. They are the story of the 5 families, 4 or 5 generations, and they talk about the values of life, understanding people, how to have a happy life, how to rear children, how to behave according to the plan of God. They are the basic ideas. Whereas here in the legal literature, that will be a little tough to study, to understand. Sometimes it will be boring also, but they are very, very important. They talk about the normative life, principles of life. That are how the people, if you are said to be the people of God, how you have to behave, how you have to live, how you have to observe the laws, how you have to be obedient to your parents, how you have to be observing the commandments of God, observing the feast of God, and how you have to live socially. So the Pentateuch contains 2 kinds of literature: legal literature, narrative literature. That's very important one. Another important factor that we want to highlight in the Pentateuch is in many places it contains the faith confessions. Faith confessions. Very especially Book of Deuteronomy. When we come to Book of Deuteronomy, the Book of Deuteronomy is just before entering into the Promised Land. The book addresses the people how they should. Deuteronomos they call it. Deutero means second. Nomos in Greek language means last. Deuteronomos, second to last. It is updated version. I told you JETP, the four traditions. The later one, the same law cannot be for all the time, but rather the law has to be interpreted, updated. So the earlier laws were interpreted and updated in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 12 to 26 of the Deuteronomy laws, updated laws. Then we have another priestly laws, priestly code they call about, priestly laws, holiness code they talk about. Then they talk about the covenant code in the book of Exodus, 20 to 23 chapters, covenant code. So these are the legal material, apart from the narrative material, both joined together form the Pentateuch. Now I come to the historical books. Historical books basically become very, very important. The books called Joshua, Judges, First Samuel, Second Samuel, First King, Second Kings. 6 books. These 6 books are called Deuteronomistic history. Deuteronomistic history. Basically because according to Martin North in 1959 or so, he proposed a theory that books starting from Joshua to Second Kings might have been written by one single author, because the style, the theology, the ideology, the exhortations seem to be very similar in all these 6 books. So this might have been written by one single author, whom he called a Deuteronomistic historian. He called it a historian belonging to the Deuteronomistic community group, because for them these books. It's the story, the whole story, history of Israel, how the people settled in the promised land and how they went out of the land being exiled to foreign country. That is told in the historical books. And another important thing we talk about in the historical books is Deuteronomy history is, I told you, in the book of Deuteronomy, repetitive, and it has a haunted language, exalted language, as I told you. Same way, the Deuteronomy history, very beautiful history. Some of the best stories of the Old Testament are to be seen in the Deuteronomy history. David and Goliath, we have David and Bathsheba, we have then the story of Naboth we have, and Elijah stories. Some of the best stories of the Old Testament are to be seen in the historical books. Very beautiful history. But this history is, I told you in the last class, this history has not to be understood as a secular history of the land of Judah and Israel, but rather they have to be understood as a theological history. A theological history of God, a theological history from the faith perspective. They have spelled out their country, if we are people of God, how we have to live. That was been a question. We explain that one, they have the history, the national history interpreted in terms of faith. That's what we have, historical books we have. And next we have historical books we have. Then I told you sometime before, the covenant and very, very important element in the book of Deuteronomy history, the Davidic covenant. Earlier, the Pentateuch, I said, the Sinai Covenant is very important. Here, the God's covenant with the house of David, your throne will not be empty, and whom I appointed will succeed your throne. That's what the promise of God to David. And the Davidic covenant is very important one. The unceasability of the Davidic covenant is repeatedly highlighted by the Deuteronomists, and the story is continued the book of covenant. And also, the Deuteronomy history highlights the idea of election, chosen by God. Very, very important one. Even today, you are chosen by God. You are chosen by God. Especially in the book of Isaiah, it is said, I have written your name on the palm of my hands. The beautiful one. You are chosen by God, able to understand the word of God and follow the Lord and live according to the precepts. The people of Israel were given that idea, repeatedly reminded, you are a chosen people, royal nation, holy holy kingdom. That is the reminder that is being given by the Deuteronomies to the people of Israel, chosen by God. And second one, very important concept in the book of Deuteronomy history is, if you observe the law, you will live in the land. If you do not obey the commandments of God, if you don't observe the law, then you will be expelled from the land. So land becomes the tangible witness of God's love for the people of Israel. In the land or off the land. In the land, observe the commandments. Off the land, unfaithfulness, disloyalty, and discarding Yahweh and Yahweh's commandments. There is a beautiful idea that is told. Deuteronomy 3 is a wonderful history. Deuteronomy 3 is a wonderful history. It talks about the idea of election, idea of selection, idea of covenant, loyalty to the covenant, and also centralization of worship at Jerusalem. These are some of the ideas. In the Deuteronomy history also we meet lot of kings, starting from Saul, Solomon, David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Jeroboam, Josiah, Pekah, Ahaz, Ahab, Omri. Plenty of kings we meet, belonging to both southern kingdom and northern kingdom. What is the criterion to say a king is a good king or not a bad king? The only criterion is not about the governance or something like that, but rather if the king is obedient to Yahweh, is a good king, wonderful king, a promising king. And if he is not faithful to the Yahweh religion and not faithful to the covenant, then he is a bad king. This is the thing that is being told in the Deuteronomy history. And I told you in the last class, it is a story of didactic history and a charismatic history. Very important one. Today, Israel people look at the history as a didactic history and a charismatic history, faith proclamation. Sometime before, I had a small problem. I did not know how to come out of that problem. I was so much perplexed, so much worried, so much anxious and desperate. I told one of my friend priests, I told, Raji, I don't know whether I'll be able to come out of this problem or not, I said. Then he said a beautiful sentence. Anna, worse than these problems we have encountered, but the Lord has liberated us. The same God will continue to guide us. That's all. When we look back the history, when we look back our own life, we see the providence of God. The same thing happened to the people of Israel. They look back, whether it be the story of Saul, or story of David, or story of Solomon, they look at this history from the perspective of the faith perspective. The God who guided the history is continued to guide us. Such a faith was there so that they can able to move forward. Mainly the Deuteronomy history was written and composed. Final redaction was done in the exilic period when the people were having no land, no temple, no cult, no worship, and they were utterly in desolate situation. In that condition, when they look back the history, they want to see a hope-filled history. So they wrote the history with a lot of hope and the re-life and regeneration, returning to the land. That is a hopeful history. We have Deuteronomy history. Then we have, along with the pages of the Bible, we have Chronicles history. What do you mean by Chronicles history? We have, along with the Deuteronomy history, we have First Chronicle, Second Chronicle, Ezra, Nehemiah. These 4 books, they form a chronicler's history, they call it. There is nothing new in that, but the same history that is told in the books of Joshua to 2 Kings is repeated. But according to the author David Rees, he says, there is no other book that can be so spiritual like that of the book of the Chronicles. Because the Chronicles history is nothing but spiritual reflection of their own national history. In a very spiritual way, in a holy way, a codified way, the chronicler presents the history of Israel, starting from Adam right up to the time of exile and rededication. Ezra and Nehemiah were the leaders who were coming back from Babylon and made the people to live in the land, and to restart, restart. One thing is very, very important. I talk about the history of Israel. One important thing is whenever they failed in the history, they bounced back in the history. They had the courage and the strength and the faith in Yahweh to bounce back in the history. If such a energy is with us, such a faith is with us, we'll never mumble or fumble, we'll never will fall out, but rather we'll bounce back. The bounce back nature is told beautifully in the books of the Deuteronomy history and also in the Chronicles history. The holy life of David and how he installed the Levites. Now the temple liturgy was revived. Everything is beautifully told the Chronicles history. And the Esther and Nehemiah talk about the rebuilding of the temple and making the people to bounce back and to meet the crisis and to come out. That's what, when we build the temple of God, then God will build our houses. That was the promise that is given by Esther and Nehemiah, Ahai and Zechariah and Malachi to the people of Israel to build the temple. They built the temple. Then onwards, there is no monarchy as such, but the people of Israel were the temple community. Templeless Babylon, temple community. Once again, from that time onwards, for another 500 or 600 years, the people of Israel will be having a temple community living around the temple. Temple becomes a centralized figure. And one of the important point that in the Chronicles history is the role of Jerusalem liturgy and worship. Very, very important one. Very, very important one. The Jerusalem temple liturgy is very important one. That temple liturgy is reorganized and the Levites were installed to supervise the liturgy, and there is a proper worship to Yahweh is being offered. That was a very important one. Very important one that we see in the Chronicles history. Then I move on to the last section, that is the prophetic literature. Prophetic literature is Nabim. They call it Nabim. Nabi is Arabic of the Hebrew word that means prophet. Prophet Nabi. We say we have the Arabic language Muhammad Nabi. We say it's not. Is it not? The Nabi means prophet. In Hebrew we call it Nabi. Nabi they call it Hebrew prophet. In Greek language, prophet means prophetess. Prophetess. Femi means to speak. Pro means to speak for, to speak on behalf, to speak in front of. That's the idea. A prophet is the one who speaks for the people. Speaks for the people. That's what the prophets are. Hebrew prophets are mainly, especially important, basically because they are called by God. Many of the important prophets were having the call narrative. Like for example, book of Jeremiah, first chapter 4 to 10 verses, we have the call of Jeremiah. The book of Amos, 7th chapter 1 to 10, we have the call of Amos. Then book of Hosea 1 to 5, 3 chapters, we talk about the call of Hosea. Then book of Isaiah, we have 6th chapter 1 to 10 verses, talk about the call of Isaiah. Very important prophets have the call narrative. They are called by God, convinced of God's call, and they live. They become the mouth of God. A prophet is one who speaks for God before the people. And equally important, one who speaks for people before God, representing people before God. What a twofold function. Today we are called for the same. Before our children, before our family members, we have to talk God to our children as a prophetic voice. Same way, we have to talk the voice of our children to God as a representative of our family members. We are called to be the prophet of God even today. Now we come into divisions of the prophetic literature. We have major prophets, minor prophets. Who are the major prophets? Major prophets were Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and sometimes some people they say Daniel. Some people don't put in the category of Daniel in the major prophet. There's the 4 major prophets we have. Then minor prophets were 12 of them. We have Amos, Micah, Obadiah, Nahum, then Zephaniah, and so on and so forth. 12 minor prophets. This is one division, major prophets, minor prophets. Why major prophet? They are big and bulky and they are strong, influential. No, not that way. If the prophetic literature in the name of the prophet is long and big one, it's a problem. They are major prophet. If the prophetic literature bearing the name of the prophet less, they are called minor prophets. Take for example, book of Amos, book of Hosea, and all small books they call Joel, small book, they are minor prophets. Major prophets, minor prophets. There is another way of debating the prophetic literature. Exilic prophet, pre-exilic prophets, post-exilic prophets. Some prophets belong to 8th century before the exile. Amos, Micah, and Proto-Isaiah. These are the prophets who were prophesying in the land of Israel before the exile. They're called exilic prophets. Then take for example, some prophets were prophesying to the people of Israel during the exile. Deuteronomy, Isaiah 40 to 55 chapters, and book of Ezekiel, they are called exilic prophets. Then some prophets were functioning in the land of Israel after the exile, after 538 or so. Then Ahai, Zechariah, Malachi, these prophets were post-exilic prophets. Pre-exilic prophets, exilic prophets, post-exilic prophets, they called it. Then they called classical prophets. The 8th century prophets, with the prophecies started with them, and they are written down. The prophecy was written down in their name by them or by their school of disciples. It's called a classical prophets, Amos, Micah, Proto, Isaiah, and so on and so forth. Then we have the literary prophets, non-literary prophets. Literary prophets, non-literary prophets. Who are the literary prophets, non-literary prophets? The prophets who have the books in their name, they are called literary prophets. The prophets who don't have the name in their books in their name, they are called non-literary prophets. Take for example, one of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament is Elijah. Even to the transfiguration scene, along with Moses, Elijah only comes. No other prophet comes. But there is no book in the name of Elijah, Elisha, Gath, and so many other prophets were there. Then they were non-literary prophets because there is no literature on their name. Whereas Amos, Hosea, Micah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they have the books in their name. They are called literary prophets. These are all our way of dividing. Hebrew people, they divided the prophets into two categories. According to them, for the Sadasco says, former prophets, later prophets. Who are the former prophets? Take for example, the prophets like Elijah, Elisha, Nathan, God, all these prophets were former prophets. They are called former prophets. Later prophets were Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Micah, Zephaniah, Obadiah, Nahum, Joel, and so on and so forth. Former prophets, later prophets. Now, another important thing, the prophets were interpreting the Torah of God to the lives of the people. There are a variety of prophetic literature, so beautiful and fantastic. If only you read the prophet Isaiah, 40th chapter, 41st chapter, 43rd chapter, 45th chapter, 49th chapter, you will never leave the Bible from your hand. Such a beautiful verses. One small example I will tell you. Isaiah 49, 14 and 15. Zion, daughter Zion says, the Lord has abandoned me. The Lord has forgotten me, she says. To that, the prophetic oracle is there. It says, can a mother forget a sucking child? Can a pregnant woman forget about the child in the womb? Even if these forget, I will not forget you. There is a beautiful verse. O Jerusalem, I remember your words. I have written your name on the palm of my hands. What a beautiful words, a loving words, very affectionate words. God is so cordial, so close to us, and so much united with us. Intimacy of God can be felt in the prophetic literature, the beautiful books, whether it is of Amos or it is of Micah or Isaiah. The book of Isaiah is said to be the book of consolation. When you are tired, when you are tribulation, when you are discouraged, you can read the proverb due to Isaiah 40 to 55. Such a beautiful consolation message is awaiting for you. That is the message of prophet. And secondly, very important one, the prophets are promoters of social justice. Whether it is the prophet Amos is said to be the prophet of social justice. Micah is said to be the prophet of south. Amos of south, Micah is said. The prophets were like a roaring lions, stand before the people, proclaiming the justice of God. Very especially when the rich people have money and wealth, they have justice bent for them. When the poor people have no money, the justice is deprived for them. So at that time, how God is concerned about the poor people, the welfare of the poor and the needy and the persecuted, abandoned and lowly army of Yahweh, how they are cared by Yahweh. That is the voice of the prophet. Even today, if you stand for the poor and the needy, the downtrodden, the afflicted, the discouraged, broken people, you are the prophet of God. Secondly, the prophets were the promoters of covenant. Take for example, book of Jeremiah, 31st chapter, 31 to 34, talks about the new covenant of God. Ezekiel 36th chapter talks about the buried shalom, the covenant, eternal covenant. That's also another important thing. Yeah, the promoters of the covenant. Prophets, such a beautiful message is embedded in the books of the prophets. Prophets were social revolutionaries also. They promoted revolution in the society. There should be a revolution among the people, so that the people may abandon the evil ways and return to God. The book of Hosea talks about God's love for the people of Israel as a husband and wife relationship. Hosea and the wife Gomer is their marriage relationship is compared to the relationship between Yahweh and Israel. You are mine, God says. You are mine. You are mine, God says to people of Israel. Such a beautiful language is wonderfully presented in the prophetic literature. And prophetic literature becomes a practical application of the Torah in the individual life of the people in a particular time, particular space. That's a prophetic literature. Finally, I want to talk about the final section of the Bible, that is wisdom literature. Wisdom literature, totally we have seven books. Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Wisdom of Solomon, Psalms and Sirach. 7 books we have. In that we have two kinds of wisdom we have. The Hebrew wisdom, Proverbs and the book of Sirach, they are on Hebrew wisdom. The wisdom was coming down from the family circle, and the household circle, the patriarchal circle. Those proverbs and the sayings were connected together, and they were put under the category called mashal. The proverb, simile, metaphor, and all these categories said to be mashal in Hebrew language. They are coming under this category, Hebrew wisdom. Take for example, book of Job. It's not a wisdom book, but it does not talk about wisdom, but talks about bringing solution for the problem of suffering. So it's said to be, though it's a novel-like structure, novel-like book, it is considered one of the wisdom books of the wisdom. We have 150 psalms. One Jewish rabbi says 150 psalms are nothing but 150 steps towards God. 150 steps towards God. And he who prays the psalms twice praying, says St. Augustine. Well, he who sings twice praying, he says, that when we sing the psalms, we sing in the name of God, and Jesus is said to be the fulfillment of the psalmic promises. 150 psalms are there. Wonderful book of wisdom. And we have Greek wisdom. Take for example, Wisdom of Solomon and other books are said to be the Greek wisdom. They were a counterculture to give hand coming from the Israel people, and countering the Greek culture, Greek wisdom. Such a vast wealth is embedded in the wisdom literature. To conclude, the wisdom literature is nothing but spiritual reflection of the Torah. Take for example, book of Psalms, first verse chapter. You meditate on the law day and night. You will be a just man. You will not dwindle away from the path of God. You're just an honest man. Same way, the wisdom literature is nothing but the reflection of spiritual reflection of the entire Torah. That's how we understand. So we have 4 divisions, English divisions. We have 4 divisions: Pentateuch, historical books, this is a prophetic literature, and we have wisdom books. These are the small summary of the Old Testament, a small introduction to the Old Testament. To conclude, I make a small summary. In the beginning, I talked about the small introduction. Old Testament is the faith manual of the people of Israel. I said it contains didactic and charismatic history. I told you. Then I developed the history of Israel, starting from the time of Abraham right up to the time of the Romans' occupation of the land of Israel. I developed a history of Israel. Then I moved on to the formation of the Pentateuch. I told you, formation of the Pentateuch, how the JEDP 4 sources are contributing themselves for the formation of the Pentateuch. Then I will come back to geography of Israel. 5 divisions of Israel, climatic conditions, seasons, and political importance and theological significance of the geography. I talked about. Then I talked about the divisions of the Old Testament: Pentateuch, historical books, wisdom literature, and prophetic literature. And that's what. Sometimes there is a canon within the canon. They say. That means we make a choice, we make a selection when we read the Bible. Sometimes we tend to avoid the Old Testament, concentrating more on the New Testament. In fact, the New Testament is embedded in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is fulfilled in the New Testament. That's what the idea. If you reject the Old Testament God, you cannot understand fully the New Testament God. Then because the New Testament is embedded in the Old Testament. If you give importance to the Old Testament also, you'll understand better and more you living. I conclude the talk with a small quotation. Saint Grace of Child Jesus said, how much more I would have loved the Lord if only I know Hebrew and the Greek. Today we are not given the opportunity or facility to read Hebrew and Greek, but rather all the wealth of the scriptures are being explained to us. We come to know the know of God. Let's thank the Lord. Let us thank the Lord, and I thank you sincerely for your active participation, and I wait for your questions also. And I answer once again thank Father Baptist, the Secretary for the Bible Commission, CCPI, and for this opportunity. God bless you. Happy Sunday.
Thank you very much, Father. It was a very beautiful presentation. Someone has already written, very inspiring and educational and enlightening. Thank you, Father, for your initiative and efforts.